Good evening. Welcome to the Loan Officer Training Series with the Mortgage Calculator. Today we're going to be talking about alternative valuations. So a couple things we're going to go through here. Give us just a moment to go live on all the different platforms, and then we will get it started. We put the chat up on the screen. Feel free to drop a comment there in the chat as you tune in. As we go through the presentation, you can also drop any questions that you have in the chat. Be more than happy to go over those as well. All right. Okay, it looks like we're live on all the platforms, so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll take the chat off the screen for now, but go ahead and keep putting comments in there. And again, you can drop any questions you have in the chat as we go through here today as well. So welcome everyone. My name is Kyle Hershey. I'm the COO of the Mortgage Calculator, and I am joined here by our president, Nick Hershey, and our sales manager, Jose Gonzalez. We are a non-QM lender, and what we do every weekday on this show, or excuse me, not every weekday, I'm on a whole other show here, every Tuesday and Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, we do a new loan officer training here on the Loan Officer Training Series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about alternative valuations. There's a few different things that we're going to break down. So I will let Jose, our sales manager with 28 years of experience as a loan officer and a realtor, he's seen both sides of these types of alternative valuation methods. So I'll go ahead and let him take over. So go ahead, Jose.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for tonight's trainings on AVMs, CDAs, desktop appraisals, and other alternative valuations. Now, we've been really connecting the dots here on a lot of the different processes. Now, this process is more apt to occur in a non-QM loan than in an agency loan. But as you will see in the presentation, there are situations where you're going to need some type of secondary valuation confirmation on an FHA loan, for example. So many things to consider here with this. The main thing that we always want to instill in the team here is that this is all about having a certain mindset, a certain way of analyzing the loans so that you are not caught off guard with conditions. Because a lot of these conditions that some people think, oh, where did this come from, was right there in front of your eyes the whole time in the guidelines, in the automated underwriting findings if it's an agency loan, or in the interpretation of either or, right? So that's what we're going to cover today, along with some workarounds on how to do this. So AVMs, CDAs, desktop appraisals, and other alternative valuations. But again, remember the whole purpose here, this is not going to be an all-inclusive lesson where this is the only way to do it, but this is about the thought process, right? Because remember, at the Mortgage Calculator, we pride ourselves in being loan consultants, right? We want to know what's going on. We want to be able to tell our customer. So, what exactly is an appraisal, right? Because we're going to be talking about alternative or secondary valuations. What exactly is an appraisal and what is an alternative or secondary valuation? Well, as far as we're concerned, for example, here, we're going to be talking about real estate. We're not talking about jewelry, art, cars, anything like that. We're talking about real estate. So, an appraisal, as far as our purposes here, is a real estate opinion. That's real, real critical part there of the definition. A real estate opinion of value for the subject property by a licensed appraiser used to determine the loan to value, right? You got to arrive at the value so that then you can have the loan to value. And then obviously we're not going to get into how to determine loan to value. If it's a purchase, it's going to be the lower of the purchase price or the appraised value, whichever is lower, for example. Now, let's talk about valuation approaches, right? The sales, because on an appraisal, there's, on a residential appraisal, there's three valuation approaches. The most common approach and the one that's given the most weight in residential transactions, and usually the one that's used to determine the valuation, is the sales comparison approach. That's the one where you see comparable sales of sold, and then they also like to put pending sales and listed properties to see what the trend is. Because if the listed properties and the pending sales are trending lower, then your purchase, your sales price or your appraised value, you could have an issue with your valuation. So the sales comparison approach, the most common approach, that's the one that you have to be most aware of when you're doing like your reconsideration of values, right? When that appraiser comes in a little low. Then the second approach, which is used as a supplement to the sales approach, appraisers just like to dot their I's, CYA, as we like to say, is the cost approach. The cost approach, or the reproduction value. You see that in one of the pages there where it says the square feet of the structure in terms of living area, then in terms of like garage and non-living area, and then they talk about the lot value, and then they throw some depreciation in there, and then they determine the reproduction cost of the property, as it stands. And then, but that one never really comes into play in anything other than maybe really the insurance, right? And then the third approach is the income approach. The income approach is, just what the income is depending, or should I say, what the value is depending on the income if it's a rental property. So obviously not a consideration if it's not an investment property, and even on an investment property, it's not going to be the determining value, the approach for the value. It's more on commercial transactions where the income approach comes into play. And in some commercial transactions, that's where the income approach really becomes the main approach, especially if you're looking at an asset that you don't really have a lot of comps for, right? But you certainly have verifiable income. So then you have the income approach. So alternative or secondary valuations are used to supplement an appraisal when a secondary valuation confirmation is required by underwriting. So that's a little bit of a tongue twister there, but it's only going to be it's only going to come into play if something triggers it, or like in the case of an FHA loan, or if it's stated in the guidelines, right? So can be a guideline requirement on all loans for a certain loan type, like non-QM, right? Like DSCR non-QM loans, or all non-QM loans other than DSCR. So you really have to look at the specific guideline for your option and then see if that is a requirement. And I'll give you some examples in a minute. But remember, this is all about establishing a mindset. That's what we're doing, the thought process, how you analyze these situations so you don't get caught off guard by these conditions 10 days from when you're trying to close. You should be proactive on all of these situations to try to have a complete of a file at submission, or at least be working on it throughout the process so that you can submit all your conditions for your clear to close because you already knew what was going to be requested, right? So can be a guideline requirement on all loans for a certain loan type. Can be the result of a flip. I mentioned this a couple of times with FHA loans, and we just had one come into play like that I saw where an MLO had to switch their file from an FHA file to a conventional file because the seller had been on title for less than 90 for less than 90 days at the time that the property went under contract. FHA says you got to be on contract at least 91 days to be able to go into contract. And then if you go into contract for more than 100% of what you pay for the property, now you need a second appraisal as well. Now, keep in mind, there may be additional overlays by the particular investor you're using for that FHA loan. on these type of situations, so always be aware of that. But I'm just going straight FHA, what FHA says. On non-QM, we all know that flips are a really big deal. On a non-QM purchase, for example, now you got to be aware of those guidelines. But on a non-QM purchase, it really depends on the conduit. The most restrictive one will say, which there is one out there that says, on any property that your borrower is purchasing, where the seller has been on title for less than 12 months, they're going to require additional hoops of fire to be jumped through by the borrower. And at that point, it's going to depend on the time frame, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. And it could give you an adjusted value of purchase price plus renovations only, depending on the time frame. On the flip, you got to look at the guidelines. Others may say, 91 to 180 days, and the profit is more than a certain percent. Now you need a second appraisal. Others may say 0 to 90 days of profit over a certain percent. You may need a second appraisal as well. The guidelines state all of this for the particular option that you are selecting. So you have to be aware. For non-QM, it's all guideline specific, not non-QM general specific. So don't say for non-QM loans, is this a situation? It can be, but you got to check the guideline for the specific option that you're selecting. That's the beautiful thing about having all these options. Depending on the parameters of your loan, is the one that you're going to pick. And then obviously pricing comes into play, time to close, underwriting ease, all of those things come into play as well into structuring your loan, not just the rate. And then, so we mentioned a non-QM purchase, right? That's the one that's least obvious, right? You're thinking, yeah, I know on a cash out refi, I'm going to need some kind of seasoning and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't know on a non-QM purchase. Yep, on the purchase. So be aware on those non-QM purchases where the owner has been on title less than 12 months. That's considered a flip. Look into the guidelines and see how you're to handle it. Usually, it's going to be a second appraisal. And then another alternative or secondary valuation method can be a CU score. Believe it or not, the SSRs are considered a backup. But having no CU score then is going to trigger having to provide some type of alternative or secondary valuation. Because when your loan has a CU score, depending on the property type, one unit property types will always generate a CU score. Usually the cutoff is 2.5, right? I think it's like above 2.5, it's bad. Below 2.5, it's good. But a 2 to 4 unit property never generates a CU score. So before some of you go on a wild goose chase wondering, why didn't my appraisal generate a CU score? And you're trying to figure this out and making all these calls, first look at the property type. If it's a 2 to 4 unit property, those will never generate a CU score. So you know that if you have a 2 to 4 unit property and your program says if you have a CU score above a 2.5 or you don't have a CU score at all, you're going to need an alternative valuation, then know what you need, right? Prime example of not being caught off guard and knowing to order whatever alternative valuation method would be acceptable for that conduit. We're going to cover those in a minute. But just know what an alternative valuation is. And so in this case, a CU score is actually an alternative valuation method, but not having a CU score then triggers having to get a separate alternative valuation. So why is the secondary valuation or alternative valuation review requested by underwriting? Now, I've been alluding to it in this whole presentation, right? I'm always talking about the guidelines. So here I'm going to break it down a little bit for you because this is all about not getting surprised by the need for this and then all of a sudden running around like a chicken without a head trying to figure out what's the fastest way I'm going to get this done. Because you can pre-plan all of this, right? None of this should be a surprise to you if you just follow these basic steps when you're structuring your deal and take all of these factors into consideration, right? So don't get caught off guard. That's the whole purpose of this. So now, why is this being requested by underwriting? Well, as I was alluding a couple slides, it could be a general guideline requirement for all, I stress, all loans of a particular loan type. Whether I was just talking about FHA loans, I was just talking about non-QM loans, right? And how the guidelines deal with that. Non-QM generally requires a secondary review on flip purchases and flip cash outs, like I just mentioned. Then we also mentioned FHA. Flip purchase will require a second appraisal if the home is purchased within 91 to 180 days and sold for more than 100% gross profit. You're going to need that second appraisal. So, looking at what I have there in the slides, there in the images, is excerpts that I took. The top one is from a matrix on a particular loan option, and then the bottom one is when I went into the actual guideline to review what I needed to do. Because in the matrix, some matrices are more detailed than others, right? Some matrices will actually break it down for you. Others will just tell you you need to do it. So in this particular case, for this particular conduit that we have, it was pretty easy. You go to the appraisal requirements section of the matrix, and it's telling you right there it has to be from an approved AMC that they have. So make sure you check the exclusionary list. It has to be the appraisal has to include SSRs, unless it's a transferred appraisal, and then the SSRs are going to have to get generated with the XML. It's a 1004 single family residence appraisal. 2 to 4 unit is a 1025, and the condo is a 1073. They're even telling you the form numbers there. And here's where they start breaking it down. Second appraisal required for loan amounts greater than 1.5 million. Right, that's the first guidance they're telling you. Appraisal must be dated within 120 days of the note. The note is the closing date. That's the note date is the closing date. And here, where I highlighted in yellow, desk review required on all loans without a second appraisal. So in this case, if your loan is 1.5 million or under, you don't need a second appraisal, but you then will need a desk review. So you're saying desk review. What the heck is a desk review? Well, that's where then you have to go into the guidelines and break down what is the appraisal review products that this particular conduit requires for their desk review. And it's telling you right there, an appraisal review product is required on every loan file unless a second appraisal is obtained. The appraisal review product should provide an as-is value for the subject property as of the date of the subject loan transaction. And here we go. For files requiring an appraisal review product, the following options are available. The file must include a copy of the SSR, an enhanced desk review product from one of the following choices. So you see Vision, VMC, LLC, CDA from Clear Capital, or ARR from ProTech. So we're approved through all of those to get those types of reviews. Or a field review or second appraisal is acceptable. But obviously, you don't want to go that route because that's the most expensive. So now they're telling us the file must include a copy of the SSR. So in other words, from my interpretation here, looks like the SSR is, like I was mentioning, one of the alternative valuation methods, not methods, but reviews here, right? Because here, I guess from the notes, if the CU score exceeds 2.5, then you can't use it. But if the CU score is below 2.5 or below, seems to me like you wouldn't need the appraisal review. So here, if you have a 2 to 4 unit, like I had on the last loans that I sent to this particular conduit, it was a 2-unit property, didn't generate a CU score, so I needed to do my CDA, which is what I ended up ordering. So notice it says if the CU score exceeds 2.5, or the enhanced desk review product reflects a value more than 10% below the appraised value, or cannot provide a validation, the next option would be either a field review, which is another form of alternative valuation, or a second appraisal. These must be from a different appraisal company and appraiser than the original appraisal. So they're telling us a lot of stuff there, right? So I mentioned these bullet points already here. Non-QM flip purchase may require a second appraisal if the purchase price exceeds the seller's purchase price in the last 12 months or less, and high CU score. So we just covered these right now. Allow substituting a low CU score for a review. So yeah, high CU score also would be a reason why you would be requested a secondary evaluation, where the guidelines allow substituting a low CU score for a review. So that would be in this scenario here. We have an SSR with our appraisal and it has a CU score of 2.2. You're good. No need for anything else. However, above 2.5, so 2.6 or above, then, or no CU score, then you're going to need one of these items. So again, this is some scenarios, and then I'm going to break it down a little bit more since this is all about the mindset. I'm showing here a different scenario here. This is a different conduit appraisal review process. So this is non-QM conduit, and it's basically telling us the appraisal review process requires a secondary appraisal product to support the appraised value for all transactions. So examples of acceptable appraisal review products include, notice I have here AVM, and I'm going to go over the alternative product types in a minute, but an AVM, which says it must contain a value and comparative sales data to support the valuation result. Or they would accept the CU score, the Fannie Mae Collateral Underwriter Review with a score of 2.5 or less. That's what we're talking about right now. Must include a copy of the Submission Summary Report, also known as the SSRs. Every appraisal that we order through our the method that we order, right, includes SSRs. So includes SSR, includes the XML, the delivery certificate, the compliance certificate. All of that is provided with the appraisal reports that we order. Desk review is another appraisal review process that they would accept. Field review, that's like a BPO, that's like a drive-by appraisal, or a full blown out full second appraisal by a different appraiser and appraisal company, and the lower of the two appraised values is used to determine the value. And then they're telling you here the following transactions will require a clear capital CDA or like product field review or Fannie Mae collateral review with a score of 2.5 or less, LTV greater than 80%, and then they give you loan amounts here as well, or all transactions under the DSCR program. So if it's DSCR, they require CDA for everything, or these 2.5 or less SSRs. That's real important. And then real important is their appraisal review tolerance states that a 10% tolerance is permitted for all secondary review products. If the review product does not provide a value, an additional review product of a higher level must be ordered. And now higher level is going to mean more time before you get your answer and higher cost, right? Two things that are not positive in the transaction. So here, in my last slide, I will share with you what are the alternative or secondary valuation tools that you will be able to use depending on the guidelines that you pick. See, because now, see how important this is. Now, when you're pre-planning all of this kind of stuff, right, your loan is going to have a much smoother path. You're not going to get surprised by the need for a CDA at the last minute. You're going to pick the one that says, hey, let me at least pick the one that allows me to get by with a CU score, with a low CU score. In case I get that, I don't have to order anything else, right? hoping that happens. Now, by some chance, unfortunately, the appraisal comes back with a 2.8 CU score, then you're out of gas. You need to do what you got to do. But at least you gave yourself a chance. And also remember, if it's a 2 to 4 unit, it's never going to have a CU score. So don't plan on that route and then realize that you needed a CDA from the beginning. We do a lot of 2 to 4 unit properties. So now you got your guidelines, you reviewed, you have the structure of the deal, and now you know what you need, right? You need something, but now you need to know what are the types of tools that could help you depending on your loan, right? Depending on the guidelines. Well, an AVM is the least expensive of the valuation tools, the fastest turnaround time, not as accurate as a CDA. So sometimes if you need to tweak the value, you're going to have to go with the CDA, which is, part automated and part human. But the AVM is basically an automated report. It's what it is. That's what the A stands for. So it's a statistically based computer program that uses real estate information such as comparable sales, property characteristics, tax assessments, and price trends to provide an estimate of value for a specific property. There's a number of services out there that we have at our disposal as MLOs through some of the providers, some of the conduits that we have that give us the automated valuation models included in our, credentials with them. So that's one way we can get that. And then as a company, we have those as well for the official ones that we turn in with our files when needed. So an AVM is going to be the quickest because it's basically you click the button and the system's algorithm calculates what it needs to calculate, and it just spits out a report with evaluation, and hopefully you're within 10% because that's usually the threshold, 10% higher or lower. If you're too high, it's also not good, believe it or not. Now, the second type of valuation tool, secondary valuation tool, is the collateral desktop analysis, also known as a CDA. Now, this one is a combination of automated and manual review. It's a third-party desktop review, right? And so usually, turnaround time could be as quick as 24 hours if you ask for a rush. 48 hours to 72 hours is more the usual. Where an AVM could cost $10, a CDA could cost $150 to $180. Then you have a desktop appraisal, which is exactly what it is. It's a complete appraisal done by an appraiser, but not having to go visit the property. Everything else that's done, not measuring the property, but everything else, all the analysis of the comps and all that kind of stuff is done by a human being. It's researched by a human being. The report completed by a human being. It's not an automated report. So longer turnaround time than the CDA, a little bit more expensive as well. Then you have your drive-by BPO. It's the most comprehensive without being a full appraisal. They actually go out and take photos of the property and then do a more comprehensive analysis. It's completed also by a human being. More expensive, obviously, as we go down the options, each one gets more detailed, more comprehensive, and more expensive. And then the final option is just the full blown out second appraisal. It's a complete appraisal, and then, like mentioned previously, needs to be completed by a different appraiser and a different appraisal company. So these are the tools that could assist you to navigate the guidelines and get to the promised land, which is the closing, taking into consideration what you're going to face, right? So the whole idea here is don't get caught off guard with when you're going to need an alternative valuation or secondary valuation to as a supplement to verify and confirm the value of the subject property. Because the worst thing that can happen is that, it took. Oh, and by the way, in order to order the CDA, or in order to order the AVM, the official one that can be turned into underwriting to meet the conditions, the original appraisal needs to have been completed. And then remember, that original appraisal needs to be correct. Borrower needs to be the correct borrower name. Property address needs to be correct, because the AVM is just going to replicate that type of data and then do the analysis. The CDA is also going to replicate that data and then do the analysis. So if the data is incorrect, then you're going to have to get a revision to the appraisal and a revision to the CDA and or the AVM, which is going to result in more time. So please always do make sure that those are correct, and you can't order them until the appraisal is ready, because you have to provide a copy of the appraisal as well.
All right. Great things to know there. I don't see any questions. I'll give it a second in case anybody wants to drop any questions, but pretty important because we're in non-QM especially, right, Jose? I mean, you talk about FHA to watch out for, but at the end of the day, it's very prevalent with the kind of loans that we do here, right?
Oh, yes, sir, man. Especially the purchases, with so much flipping going on in a good kind of way, right? Properties being renovated, rehabbed, and then resold in less than a 12-month period. That's been fueling a lot of the transactions in the market, as we know, because we get in on those transactions from the flipper side as well, from a company standpoint. So yeah, there's so much to consider, because just imagine somebody brings you the deal, they're giving you the address, you're pre-approving them, you already have the address, you should be able to go into public records and see the information. And if you see it doesn't add up, then like it's a different person's name on the property, then they probably it's being flipped so soon that they haven't even updated the public records, and the person is already selling it. So that should be a red flag right there to obtain additional information, or let them know, hey, it looks like this is a flip, and unless they can show that it's not a flip, then this is going to be what's going to be required. Just to let the borrower know that, so there's no issues.
Okay. Let's see. We do have one question that just came in. The question is, do we have a guideline that reflects approximate charges for the different evaluation types?
Yes, we do. I mean, on the appraisal side, we have national charts by the different AMCs and what they charge for the different reports. And then in terms of these services, you can go into our knowledge center, and depending on the report type, we give a range. But in terms of, for us on the non-QM loans, I believe that's already taken into consideration in our. We don't have a separate fee, basically, for a CDA, so we already include that in our non-QM loans.
All right. All right, cool. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. That was a good one, Jose. We will be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern, because we do this every Tuesday and Wednesday evening. So thank you everybody for tuning in. We appreciate it. And we'll see you tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the next episode of the Loan Officer Training Series with the Mortgage Calculator. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good